Hello everyone. Before starting the video, please don't forget to like, share and subscribe to my channel. Thanks. How to update Ruckus R510 access point firmware via web interface. Before proceeding towards the video, I wanted to share something very important with you guys. You must know this. The recommended procedure to update the Ruckus AP's firmware is that we must first restore the access point to its factory default settings before updating the firmware, and after restoring the access point to factory default settings, we can start the firmware update process. Means, the recommended way is to always play with the default configurations. In this video, I will be updating the firmware of a pre-configured access point. I mean, an access point, which I am using on my test network and I have configured it accordingly. What I am trying to do is that, I will not restore my access point to factory default settings. Because if I restore the access point to factory default settings, then I will lose all the configurations and, I will have to reconfigure the access point again, once I update the firmware successfully. But it will definitely require time and hard work. This access point is connected to my network and I am not directly connecting it to my laptop or PC. Why am I doing this? I am doing this just to check that, if we update the firmware of our access point without restoring it first to factory default settings, will there be any changes in the AP's configurations? So, I will check all the configurations of my access point before and after updating the firmware to compare the changes, if any. Without wasting further time, let's proceed towards the practical section. How to update Ruckus R510 access point firmware via web interface. Before proceeding towards the video, I wanted to share something very important with you guys. You must know this. The recommended procedure to update the Ruckus AP's firmware is that, we must first restore the access point to its factory default settings, before updating the firmware, and, after restoring the access point to factory default settings, we can start the firmware update process. Means, the recommended way is to always play with the default configurations. In this video, I will be updating the firmware of a pre-configured access point. I mean, an access point, which I am using on my test network and I have configured it accordingly. What I am trying to do is that, I will not restore my access point to factory default settings. Because if I restore the access point to factory default settings, then I will lose all the configurations and, I will have to reconfigure the access point again, once I update the firmware successfully. But it will definitely require time and hard work. This access point is connected to my network and I am not directly connecting it to my laptop or PC. Why am I doing this? I am doing this just to check that, if we update the firmware of our access point without restoring it first to factory default settings, will there be any changes in the AP's configurations? So, I will check all the configurations of my access point before and after updating the firmware to compare the changes, if any. Without wasting further time, let's proceed towards the practical section. Step number 1. Check the connectivity with access point. First of all, we need to make sure of the connectivity with the access point. We need to make sure that the access point is alive and responding well. To check the connectivity with the access point, I will use the ping command followed by the IP address of the access point. The IP address of my access point is 10.0.2.40. I will now open the CMD. Here, I will type the command ping 10.0.2.40. After typing the ping command, I will press the Enter button. We can see that The access point is responding well, which means the access point is working fine and alive. If your access point is not responding, then make sure that the AP is properly connected to the network and it is powered on. Step 1 is completed. Step number 2. Check the current software version or firmware version. To check the current software or firmware version, I have to access the web interface of the access point. So, I will open the internet browser and I will type the full URL like https://10.0.2.40. Then press the Enter button. Click on the Advanced button. Then click on the option which says Proceed to, followed by the IP address. The login page of the web management interface will appear. Before entering the credentials, let me remind you that I have changed the configuration of this access point. As I mentioned before, I am using this access point on my network. So, now I will type the username and password, which I have set while configuring this access point, and then I will click on the Login button to log into the web management interface. This is the web management interface, where we can change all the configurations as per our requirements. First of all, the important thing is to note down the current software version, or we can say the current firmware version of the access point. As we can see here, the current software version is 110.0.0.0.663. Note down this software version because we are going to need this later on to compare with the latest available firmware, if any. Besides this, we can see that I have changed the default device name of the access point and also the location of this device. If I click on the Internet option, you see that I changed the default dynamic IP address to the static IP address. If I click on the option 2.4G and 5G, we can see that I have created one SSID against each frequency. I mean one SSID against radio 2.4G and one SSID against 5G. I will check again all these configurations for any changes, after updating the firmware. I will now log out from here, and I will close the browser. This step is completed. Step number 3. How to search and download the latest available firmware. In this step, I will show you that how we will search and download the latest available firmware from Ruckus website. It is very important to know that, to download any software from Ruckus official website, we need to create an account on Ruckus website and we must be logged into our Ruckus account. If we are not logged into our Ruckus account, then we will be asked to log in before downloading the firmware. We cannot download any software from Ruckus official website until we log into our Ruckus account. So, I will open the web browser, and I will go to the Ruckus official website, by typing the full URL address, www.ruckuswireless.com. And press the Enter button. This is the official website of Ruckus. On the main page of Ruckus website, click on the Support tab. The drop-down menu will appear. In the drop-down menu, click on the option, Support Portal. Since I am not yet logged into my Ruckus account, that is why it will redirect me to the login page, so that I will be logged in before proceeding. As I already have a Ruckus account, so I will enter my credentials here. I will type the email address and the password to log into my account first. After entering the credentials, I will click on the Login button. After logging into my account, I will be redirected to another page, where I will again click on the Downloads button. On this page, we will choose the product, which we are going to download the firmware for. I will click on the down arrow like button. We will see a list of different products in the drop-down menu. Since I have a Ruckus R510 device, so, I will scroll down, and I will select the exact product, which is Ruckus R510. As soon as I select the product, I will wait for a moment and, it will redirect me to another page, where the product details will be displayed. As you can see that, this page contains all the information regarding Ruckus R510 access point. I will scroll down again and click on the Downloads button. After clicking on the Downloads button, a list of different firmware will be displayed. Here, all the firmware, I mean the old, and the new firmware will be available here, on this page. Let me share something with you guys, which is very important, if you are going to download the firmware for Ruckus access point. 1. If we are using our access point in standalone mode, then we will search for the firmware which contains the word solo. 2. The firmware format must be .bl7. 3. We will download the latest firmware, which will be available for all users, not for premium users. Now, to search the firmware for an access point, which works in a standalone mode, I will press Ctrl and F key from my keyboard to open the search box. In the search box, I will type the keyword solo to search the firmware for access point working in standalone mode. When I press the enter button, we can see that it has found a total of 5 firmware with the word solo, and the first name of the firmware which contains the word solo will be highlighted. If we check the name, format, and the date of the firmware, we will see that this is the latest solo firmware available at the moment for Ruckus R510 access point. But if I open the link in a new tab, we will see that this firmware is available for premium users only. Since I do not have a premium account, so I will not be able to download this software. Let's go back to the previous page again. I will click on the down arrow in the search box to search the next available firmware on this page. If we again check the name for the keyword solo, format and the date, everything sounds perfect. But if I open the link and check the availability of this firmware, we will find that this firmware is also available for premium users only. The same way, I will go to the next available firmware and I will check that which type of users the firmware is available for. Yes. We can see that this firmware is available for all users, plus the format is BL7 and also the updated date is the newest date of the firmware, which is available for all users. The important thing is the file name over here. File name includes the AP model number along with the firmware version. If we compare this version with the version that I mentioned to note down in the previous step, we will find that this is the newest version available at the moment. Since everything looks perfect, so I will click on the Download Software button to download this file. Here on this page, I will select the button which says, I understand and agree, and then I will click on the download button again. After clicking on the download button, it is asking me to select the location, where I wanted to download and save this file. Since I do not want to change the location, so I will click on the Save button to download the file. Download process will begin. After the download process is completed, I will open the folder to show you the file that I downloaded. This is the firmware file, and we will be working on this file in our next step. That's it. Step number 3 is completed. Step number 4. Updating the firmware via web interface. I have copied the firmware file to a folder on my desktop which I downloaded. Let me open the folder to show you that the file is inside this folder. We can see that the firmware file, which we will be working on, resides inside the folder on the desktop. Now, to update the firmware via the web interface, I must first access the AP's web interface. So, I will open the internet browser. Here, I will type the complete URL address like https:// followed by the IP address of the AP. After typing the full URL, I will press the Enter button. Click on the Advanced button. Then click on the link, which says Proceed to followed by the IP address of the AP. The Login screen will appear. Enter the current credentials, I mean the username and the password. After entering the current credentials, I will click on the Login button. Web Management Interface accessed successfully. We can see that the currently installed firmware version is 110.0.0.0.663. Now, to update the firmware of this access point to the latest firmware, which we have already downloaded, I will click on the Upgrade option under the Maintenance tab on the left side of the page. On the right side of the page, select the Upgrade method as Local. Make sure that in the target selection the option Firmware is selected. I will click on the button Choose File under the Local options. Now, I will go to the desktop of my laptop to access the folder where I have saved the firmware's file. So I will click on the desktop. Then I will open the folder. Here, I will select the file and then click on the Open button. We can also select this file only by double-clicking on the file. When I click on the Open button, we can see that the file has been selected because it is displaying the name of the file. There is a warning message, which says that we will be unable to access our AP during the update process, and we must not remove the power plug until the update process is completed. So I will do as it says. And now I will click on the button, Perform Upgrade. As soon as I click on the Perform Upgrade button, the file will start loading first before installation. That is why it is saying, Loading. I will wait for a moment till the process begins and it shows the message that wait for the device to reboot. Here we are. Now it says, we need to wait because the device is rebooting. Meanwhile, I will open the CMD, and I will type the ping command followed by the IP address with -T switch to continuously ping and monitor the AP's response. Since the access point is under reboot process, hence we will not have any response from the device in the start. But we will wait until the device will start responding. After completing the update process, a pop-up message will appear, which says, I am all done. Click on the OK button to reconnect. So, I will click on the OK button. In a while, we will see that the access point will start responding to ping command. Here we are, the access point has been started responding to the ping command now. I will now minimize the CMD page. I will now click on the refresh button to reconnect to the web interface. The login page is appeared. But if we check the IP address of the AP, we will find out that the IP address remain the same. I mean, the firmware update process has nothing to do with IP address of the access point. In the credentials sections, again I will enter the current credentials, I mean the username and the password, and then I will click on the login button. I will say again that the firmware update process didn't change the login credentials either. After logging in, if I check the software version, I can see that the software or firmware has been successfully updated to the latest firmware. I mean, it has been updated from older version 110.0.0.0.663 to the newest version 114.0.0.0.1360. Besides this, if I check the device name, it is same as it was before. Same is the case with the device location. If I check the IP address, we can see it is also the same which I assigned manually while I was configuring the access point. If I check the SIDs against the frequencies 2.4G and 5G, again we will find out that everything is the same as it was before updating the firmware. Hence, it is confirmed that the firmware update process will have no impact on other configurations of the access point, but only the firmware with fixes and bugs removed will be updated. So, I can say that it is not necessary to restore an access point to factory default settings before updating the firmware. Because if we restore the access point to factory default settings, then we will lose all the current configurations and we will have to reconfigure the access point again. Note: the Ruckus R510 access point has no configurations backup option, if it is working in a standalone mode, where we can restore the configurations by simply importing the backup file after updating the firmware. So, take it easy and do not worry about the other configurations while updating the firmware. That's it. We have successfully updated the Ruckus R510 access points firmware via web interface. Thanks for watching this video. Next video: how to downgrade the Ruckus R510 access points firmware via web interface. Please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to my channel. If you have any query, leave it in the comments section below. I will be more than happy to entertain. Thanks for watching this video.